Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. In the studio with me today, I have Dr. Bev Vitali. Bev is an associate professor of business at Christian Brothers University. Christian Brothers is a private undergraduate and graduate university here in Memphis, Tennessee. Bev, thanks for joining me today.
Sure, I'm glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit, you teach multiple classes at CBU, and what are the classes that you teach there?
Yeah, I'm a professor of management, so that's a very broad field, and I'm fortunate enough that they let me experiment from time to time, so I've taught a lot of different classes. But my primary classes are, it's a course called Organizational Behavior, where we look at personalities and teams and organization and how that impacts the bottom line for companies. I also teach business ethics and a new course called Happiness 101, which is a course that looks at how employees can change their happiness level at work and why it's important for employers to focus on happiness of their employees as well.
Oh, that's great. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring you on today because, you know, a lot of the job seekers that I meet with, and I know a lot of the folks who are listening today, you know, are unhappy with their jobs and they're looking for a new job because they're unhappy with their jobs. I guess, you know, when they're out interviewing, what are a few of the things that they should be looking for in that new job that they're trying to find?
Good. Well, remember that when you're interviewing that you're interviewing the company as well. You know, they're not just interviewing you, but you're interviewing them for a good fit. And so one of the primary things that I think job seekers need to focus on is the investment that the company's going to make in them. Are they going to let the employee do what they do best, use their strengths on a daily basis at work? Are they going to continue to invest in that employee in terms of training and development? Are those types of things important in the company because they should be important to the employee?
Oh, I totally agree. Well, what do you find as you're talking with different people, what do you find is a big misconception about finding happiness at work?
That it's up to the employer. There are some things that employers can put into place that will impact the happiness level of their employees, but it's really up to each individual employee to find their happiness at work. So, you know, sitting back and saying, well, they're just not, you know, investing in me, or they're just not, the company's just not, doesn't care about me. It's really up to the employee to decide for themselves. Happiness is a choice, and so it is up to the employee to decide, you know what, I'm going to go to work every day. I'm going to be grateful for what I have. I'm going to continue to invest in myself and see where this job takes me. And it may end up that it's just not a good fit, and that happens, and you have to leave. But a lot of times the employee needs to take more responsibility for finding their own happiness.
Yeah, I do think that is important because the unfortunate situation would be to move from place to place and going from job to job and just continuing to be unhappy and not sort of recognizing that pattern and looking for opportunities to break it.
Yeah, I think of the illustration of somebody going to the airport and carrying their bags with them and how heavy that gets. Well, you carry your own bags from employer to employer, and that gets very heavy. So we need to figure out ways to open up our bag and unpack it and, you know, deal with the issues that we bring to the workforce, and then make the choice to unpack that bag and make your life a little bit lighter and a little bit happier.
Agreed. So when someone has made that decision, you know, they are going to try to find happiness for themselves at work. What are some of the steps that you recommend that they consider taking?
The first step, I think, is for employees to know themselves, and that's where a coach can come into play. You know, different assessments that a coach can give and different ways of looking at yourself that is very valuable to employees. A coach can provide that. But there are also some assessments that employees can take on their own. Gallup has an instrument called StrengthsFinder 2.0, and it actually lists, or after the assessment, you get a list of your top 5 strengths. And employees who are able to use those strengths at work are those who are going to end up being more engaged and happier in the workplace.
That's a great suggestion, and that's a great little test that they can take to kind of identify those strengths. Where can they get a hold of the Strength Finder?
Barnes & Noble. It's a very popular book. It's written by a fellow named Tom Rath. It's called StrengthsFinder 2.0. It's only about $15, and that's not much to invest in yourself. So it's a pretty good bargain. But you can also, there are some free assessments online. Values in Action has an assessment. It's viacharacter.org is where you can find that assessment. It also gives you a list of your top 5 strengths. These are character strengths that they actually test you on, but it's the same concept that if you continue to do what you do best and develop that part of you that is already strong, that's actually going to make you happier than trying to be the well-rounded employee and trying to compensate for your weaknesses. Why don't you focus on what you do well and continue to develop that? So both of those assessments, StrengthsFinder and viacharacter.org, focus on developing strengths.
Oh, that's great. I mean, they're very accessible and
Absolutely.
inexpensive, so it's a great place to start. Well, as you have researched this topic, what are some of the things that people assume will make them happier, that just don't make them actually happier?
Well, believe it or not, research says that it's not raises, it's not promotions that make you happier. It's actually things like gratitude, self-esteem, optimism, the things that we can actually cultivate in ourselves. So when we begin to look outside of ourselves for satisfaction, when we begin to say, what can you give me to make me happy? That's actually the wrong way to look at it. Instead, you need to dig within and find ways to be grateful for what you have, continue to develop yourself, be optimistic about your future. Those are the kinds of things that actually make us happy. And money, it's important, but it actually does not bring us happiness.
I think when I heard you speak, you mentioned something about how long the effect of money lasts. Like when you get a raise or you are making more, that it's like a brief moment or something when you're happy and then it goes away.
Sure. Yeah, the research indicates, they've looked at lottery winners, for example. So you get this big influx of money and you're happier for a year, is what the research shows. But then you go back to your what they call happiness set point. And we all have a happiness set point. And so after a year of being, oh yeah, I've got all this money, you actually your happiness level begins to deteriorate and you're just at the same level you were before you won the lottery. With raises, it's even worse. You're happy for 2 weeks. And then it's really the first time you get that paycheck, that increased paycheck, and you're like, yay, wow, oh, wow, I still have bills to pay. And what we tend to do is kind of meet ourselves. When we get a raise, we end up spending more money, and it becomes a snowball effect. And so it's just amazing, really, what people think will make them happy, but what in reality actually does.
Absolutely. Well, for those people who are listening that have had more than one job that's gone badly and they're really desperate to find a job that's a better fit for them, I mean, do you have any advice on how they might be able to break this cycle or how they could evaluate themselves to figure out what's happening?
Sure. I think, again, working on yourself with a coach or on your own. There's lots of good resources out there, lots of good books that you can use. One of them is a book by Daniel Pink where it's called Drive. And he says that in order to be engaged, which is very closely aligned with happiness, but in order to be engaged in the workforce, you need to find a job that's going to provide you with the ability to to master your job. So again, a company that is working to develop you, and you're developing yourself. So mastery is important. Autonomy is important for engagement. So the ability not necessarily to come and go as you please, but be able to do the work as in the best way that you see fit. And then finally, fulfillment. So finding a job where you actually believe that you are giving something back, that you understand that it's not all about you, but that the job is actually in service to others. And there, all jobs can be approached that way, but some jobs tend to be more so than others. So those three areas, autonomy, mastery, and fulfillment, is really what keeps employees engaged. And so being able to identify those things that bring you fulfillment, working on yourself and knowing yourself better, can actually break that cycle of job hopping. Believing that, I'm in control of this. I don't have to rely upon my employer to give me everything. I can actually find the answers within myself. And become engaged and happy and break that cycle.
Oh, I totally agree. And I've kind of noticed that as people move through their career and sometimes, as they age, their priorities shift. And I've noticed generally the trend is oftentimes when you're younger, you're kind of getting established, the money is much more important. And there becomes a time when fulfillment or family or whatever, your personal life and happiness starts to raise. The priority level goes up. And, I've had a number of clients come to me and say, I don't care how much money I make anymore. It can be half as much money, but I want to feel fulfilled. I want to feel like I'm doing something important and that my work is valued. So it's really interesting to kind of see that shift over someone's lifetime. And I think, sometimes it can be a bit stressful because really letting go and being willing to change those priorities can really make you reevaluate a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm sure as a coach you do see that quite often. We actually see that in higher ed as well. We have an adult program designed for students who have hit some kind of wall. Either they need the degree to get promoted at work, or like you were saying, they realize, I've chosen the wrong career, or I've chased the dollar for too long, and now I want to make a difference. And so they turn to school and get a totally different degree or complete their degree. And so we see a lot of that in people in mid-30s to early 40s, but it can hit you at any time in life where you realize, wow, there's really more to it than just the big house, the big car. I really do want to make a difference in other people's lives.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I know that can cause people to be frustrated, and you kind of alluded to it when you talked about sort of switching careers. Sometimes we get stuck in a career that's actually really difficult for us. Like maybe we're really focused on details at work, but we're not a detail person. I mean, what suggestions do you have for those people? Should they work harder to be better at those things? Or, what should they do?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. And you gave a great example for me personally, because I'm a real creative type and I have a real problem with details. And so what I've learned to do is surround myself with people who are good with details. And, there's some things that I have to do myself. For example, I have to grade, which is a very detail-oriented task. But there are other things that I do during the day that I can actually have somebody else on my team do for me. For example, we have an amazing woman who knows technology and very well, and helps me keep up with my calendar because I have difficulty with even that minor detail. And so surrounding yourself with people who have skill sets that are different than yours, and then working together as a team to get the work accomplished. We a lot of times growing up, parents are guilty, and heck, I'm a parent and I did the same thing even though I knew I wasn't supposed to. We want our children to be well-rounded, and we talk about, hey, your child may bring home a report card with all A's and one D, and what do we focus on? We focus on the D, we focus on the deficit. But what we need to learn to do is, rather than trying to be well-rounded individuals work on well-rounded teams. Because, your child may never be good at history, remembering those details, remembering those facts. But let's learn to embrace the fact that your child is very creative. And when we get to be adults, let's embrace the fact that that employee is creative and help that employee manage around the fact that they can't deal with details.
That's tough in a work environment because I know a lot of times there's a lot of pressure to be good at everything. But I think sometimes if you can focus more on your strengths, you can be very good at something rather than just kind of average at everything that you're doing. And it sounds like the real message that you have, though, is to kind of accept yourself and work around or work with what you have rather than to try to be somebody that you're not.
And that's great advice, really, because we can't be all things to all people, but we can be really good at what we're wired to be. So continuing to learn about what it is that you do best and figuring out a way to do that at work. And you're right, some work situations lend themselves better to doing that than others. But even in some of the most stifling of work environments, you can figure out ways to, at least once a day, do something that you're really good at.
Right. So that kind of leads me to my next question, and that is, if someone feels like they are stuck in their job, they're just in a place where they can't switch right now. Maybe they've got children and they have bills and they have a lot of commitments, but they're really unhappy, like something is just really not right. I mean, are there little things that they might do today to try to help improve their happiness in their current situation, even if they can't change it?
Sure. One of the most powerful exercises that the happiness literature, the research is showing, is something called 3 good things. It's a real simple exercise, but is very impactful. What you do is at the end of each day, it doesn't have to be the end of each day, it could be the beginning, or even you can catch yourself during the middle of the day. But what you're going to try to do is capture 3 good things that happen to you during the day, and you write them down. So, for example, I might mention that on my way here, my husband texted me and said, "Hey, I know you're about to do a podcast. You're going to do great. You live this, and so you'll do a great job." Well, that was very impactful. Of course, I'm very grateful to have a husband like that. So you write down what happened. I got a text from my husband, and then the impact that it had for you. Well, I'm grateful to have such a supportive husband in my life. So those 2 aspects, what happened and why it was impactful to you. If you can find 3 things to write down every day, and I think we can all find 3 things to be grateful for every day. If you do that for a week, the research tells us that you'll be happier for 6 months. So it's really a great bang for your buck, so to speak. It just takes a few minutes at the end of each day or the beginning of each day, and you write down three things, and it'll make a difference in your happiness level for 6 more months.
That's great. I know, when I heard you speak, we talked to the person next to us about, what our thing was that day that made us happy. And the woman who was sitting next to me, she had spoken to her mother on the phone while she was driving, and her mother's in her 80s, so she doesn't get to talk to her all that often. And she said every time they talk, my mother says, "I was just about to call you." And she said, "I know she wasn't, but it's always just really positive, and we have such a good conversation." And it made her whole day. So it was really a small detail. It wasn't related to work, but it made her happier that day.
Right, absolutely. Just being able to notice those things in our life that bring positive energy, it can really make a shift in your brain. In fact, they've found that it changes brain chemistry to be able to focus on the positive things in your life rather than the negative.
Right. And I know, a lot of folks in today's economy, they are dealing with a lot of stress in the workplace. In particular, some companies are laying off. We've seen a lot of that lately here in Memphis, where companies are restructuring, they're cutting back, and even just the change, even for people who keep their jobs, the change in itself becomes very stressful to them and can really bring them down in terms of happiness. is there anything that you could suggest for folks that are going through a really difficult time of change that might help them?
Sure. One thing, hopefully I can describe this without a visual aid, but if you would picture a circle, and inside that circle, picture the words, what's important, and then a second intersecting circle, so you have a little overlap there. And within that second circle, picture the words, within my control.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to focus on are that intersection, the things that are important, but also within our control.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times being laid off because of a bad economy, that's not within our control. But what is within that circle and what is important that we can focus on is continuing to be grateful for what we do have. And happiness, as I mentioned earlier, is a choice. So figuring out those things that are important that are within our control and focusing on those rather than continuing to focus on those aspects of our life that we really don't have any control over. They may be important, and of course, being employed is very important, but sometimes that's not within our control. And so only focusing on I mean, let's face it, the only part of our life that we have control over is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing in on putting our energy on those things that we can control, that are important, that we can control, is really one of the avenues to happiness.
Oh, I totally agree. I think a lot of times when we focus on those things we can't control, that's when we feel really frustrated.
Right,
You
right.
know.
And anybody who's raised children knows how much can be outside of your control.
Sure.
Still very important, but outside of our control. And so just focusing in on the things. I can only control what I do today, how I react.
Mm-hmm.
I can't control what hits me today, but I can control how I react to it.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned something when we first started talking about sort of your happiness set point or your sort of index. Can you explain a little bit? I mean, is happiness something we're born with? Is it something we create? I mean, and what is it exactly?
Sure, that's a great question. What we know from research is that we are all born with a certain level of happiness. So if you think about your parents and whether or not your parents were, just kind of by nature happy, then chances are you're probably going to just generally be a happier person. But that only accounts for 40% of our happiness level.
Mm-hmm.
Life circumstances, for example, whether or not you are employed, whether or not you're married, your gender, your race, those things only account for 10% of our happiness level. So that leaves 50% of our happiness level, 40 to 50% of our happiness level that's within our control. And so by making certain choices in life on a daily basis, being very intentional about being grateful, very intentional about being optimistic about your future, savoring life's moments, good moments, all of those things can impact your happiness level. So even if you look back at your parents and say, oh my gosh, they were miserable, I don't stand a chance. Actually, you do, because 40 to 50% of your happiness level is your choice within your control.
Well, that is a big percent. I mean, it's interesting that we're born with so much predetermined. It feels like in life there are a lot of things that way, but 50% is quite a lot that we have to work with.
Yeah, actually, they've the way that they studied this was through identical twins,
Oh.
and they could see differences in the attitudes even with identical twins. So even when you have that same set point, because based on choices that you make during the day and over a lifetime. You could actually see a difference in the attitudes of these identical twins.
That's interesting. I actually have identical twin brothers.
Oh, do you? Wow. Yeah, my dad's an identical twin. So
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in the two of them?
I do. Some of it has been very intentional since they were very small. One of them, and I'm much older than they are, so I've been able to watch them grow up since they were born.
Wow.
And, when they were very small, one would only eat ketchup and the other would only eat mustard. And, they wanted to be very different.
Yeah.
And professionally, one works on sustainability. And, he's done things like build wells in Africa and,
Oh, wow.
Worked for the EPA for a little while.
Wow.
And the other one has been very business-minded. So he studied business and got his CPA, and he actually works for an oil company.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So
That is totally different, isn't it?
It's been really fun to watch.
Yeah.
And their, approaches to life and what's important to them, it's very different.
Yeah,
It's very different.
and that's got to be choice because they're genetically they're identical. So it's the choices that they've made.
Right. It's been very interesting to me because, one studying engineering and the other studying business, they use such different parts of you. And to see them each develop those parts very differently and sort of develop what's important to them differently, it's been interesting.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating.
For
it really
sure.
is.
Do you see that with your father or?
Well, my father, I guess he's 85 now, and they chose very similar career paths. They were both high school coaches for a while, and then my dad went into corporate training, and my uncle worked for the FBI. So they were both very happy people. I was fortunate to have very happy parents. I grew up in a family with a lot of laughter.
That's great.
And so both my dad and my uncle were very funny to be around. So no, I didn't actually see those differences, but it happens a lot in identical twins where one will take one path in life and end up miserable, and the other one will end up happy, and it's all about life choices.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, is there any other advice that you would offer to our listeners today who are struggling to find happiness at work?
Yeah, I would just say that sharpening your saw, which is a term that Stephen Covey teaches us, which basically just means investing in yourself is just critical. Knowing yourself, accepting yourself, and even celebrating who you are and continuing to develop what you do best is essential to happiness, both on the job and in your personal life.
Oh, that's great. And so if someone who's listening today was interested to enroll in your class at CBU, is it open? Could anybody enroll in the happiness class?
Well, actually, I guess we would have an audit type option.
Okay.
Yeah, but any working adult, we'd love to talk to them about continuing their education through our adult program.
Oh, that's great. And how would they learn about it? I mean, would they go to the website or?
Yeah, they can go to www.cbu.edu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Bev, for joining me today. This discussion has been very helpful. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.